Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is the Ukraine war news update for the 29th of April 2023. Let's get to our opening gambit. Just a little word of warning. My timings for videos this weekend will be a bit nuts because I've got to go into my son's football match this morning, and then a rugby tournament, the last one of the season, tomorrow for half the day, so I might not be able to get my videos out as per normal this weekend or at the times you would expect. Right, Ukrainians claim that Russians lost 580 liquidated personnel yesterday, 3 tanks, 3 APCs, 3 artillery systems, 4 drones, 21 cruise missiles as a cruise missile attack the night before. So this is reflected in today's. I told you that the figures were compiled before the cruise missile attack during the night of the night before. 17 vehicles and fuel tanks and 2 pieces of special equipment. Everything's fairly low, other than the cruise missiles, of course, apart from these 17 vehicles and fuel tanks and 2 pieces of special equipment. That could be electronic warfare, that could be radar systems, so on and so forth, but a fairly average day across the board. As I keep saying, we're in this transition period. Let's see if there's some information that can help us understand those figures, or the figures more generally. Russians kill Russians in the war more often than Ukrainians. More than 50% of the dead Russian soldiers in Ukraine died from wounds that did not threaten their lives. Simply, the wounded were not treated properly, said Artem Katulin, head of the Tactical Medicine Training Center of the Kalashnikov concern. So this is coming from the Russians. And 30% of the arms and legs were amputated for nothing, just because the wounded were improperly tourniqueted. So this is something we said before, that the killed to wounded ratio for the Russians is far worse. There are just more people die than with the Ukrainians when they are wounded, and this is obviously not good for the Russian statistics. And when you're saying the Russians are losing X times as many people as the Ukrainians, this is largely as a result of not being able to get medical assistance as timely as the Ukrainians. That golden hour for the Russians is poorly, I guess, poorly solved as a problem. You need really good specialist medical equipment, medical attention within 1 hour of being injured on the front, and if you don't get it, your chances of dying are much higher. Prigozhin even admits Russia's losing. So this has come from Prigozhin. The key point of what he has said in one of his sort of rants or speeches or interviews. But again, these scumbags making the decision, they must answer before the mothers of the deceased, because instead of 1, several people die. Ratio of 1 to 5. Instead of 1 dying in an assault on a building, 5 are dying because there are no shells. We have nothing to destroy the enemy with. So he's saying that the Russians are losing far more than they should be. And then when we look at equipment, Jakub Yanovsky, who helps Oryx, is back on it. I haven't seen these. These are 2-day updates that he has historically given, but I think he was a bit ill, and so hasn't been doing them as of late, possibly, or at least I haven't seen them as much recently. But he's back, and two-day totals. Ukraine has lost 14 vehicles, 1 tank there, and then a lot of these are. So you've got a couple of infantry fighting vehicles and MRAPs, and then we get onto howitzer. This is a counter battery radar. That's and then for a air defense system TLAR for the Tor, and a launcher. So that's pretty bad. That's 3 kind of air defense systems or air defense system components, but 14 in total. And you get to the totals for Russia over the same period, and it's 42. So it's 14 versus 42. You know, more tanks, more infantry fighting vehicles, a lot more infantry fighting vehicles. And then when you get down to these launchers, you've got a helicopter, you've got some other bits and pieces, but actually, yeah, electronic warfare and a launcher, but the Russians have done a better job of taking out Ukrainian air defense systems, at least according to this 2-day summary, but they've lost 46 in total. So that's over 3 times the amount of equipment the Ukrainians have lost. But it's also important to see what the type of equipment is. But anyway, that gives you a sense of the equipment losses. That's visually confirmed losses, so they'd definitely be confirmed. So when we look at tanks, this came out a couple of days ago. I didn't show it, but there were 2 tanks taken out in 30 seconds. and yeah, one and then another taken out. Looks, I don't know whether that's hit by mines or is it whether it's hit by ATGMs. I don't think I can see anything coming in, but yeah, this is the second one. So the first one was taken out and then drives into a building essentially, and then the second one was hit just afterwards. Here, you see it. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that's a mine. That was a top attack munition by the looks of it, actually. So it probably was something like a javelin or Enlaw. Right. Okay. Moving on. I had a big old whinge yesterday about a GEPhard being taken out, and then lots of S300s being taken out, saying that this is not good news for the Ukrainians. And we had a little look at the statistics just then. They are not protecting their air defense systems well enough. Well, it turns out the GEPhard was taken out in pretty much exactly the same place as the S300, as an S300. So, they know that Lancers are active in that area. You need to be double careful. Now, that GEPhard, some people are saying that actually what best explains the fact that it was just kind of sitting there on the side of the road, not moving, is that it had actually thrown a track rather than it was just like hanging out there. Someone saying, from my own experience of commanding and driving tracked vehicles in the army, 12 years, I'm leaning towards a thrown track due to soft ground. I can't see any evidence of a landmine, only seeing. So the idea is it's not just hanging out, being stupid and attracting fire. However, it is a loss nonetheless, and the S300s are a massive loss. Right, the British Defence Intelligence Update says in the early hours of 28th of April 2023, Russia launched the first major wave of cruise missiles strikes against Ukraine since early March 2023. Although Ukraine shot down most of the missiles, at least 25 civilians were killed. The attack suggested departure in Russia's use of long-range strikes. The wave involved fewer missiles than those over the winter and was unlikely to have been targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. There's a realistic possibility that Russia was attempting to intercept Ukrainian reserve units and military supplies recently provided to Ukraine. Russia operates an inefficient targeting process and prioritizes perceived military necessity over preventing collateral damage, including civilian deaths. So the supposition here is that Russia was attempting to hit logistics or supplies of the new stuff coming in for the counteroffensive, but it hammered buildings like this 9-story building in Uman, which is still, if a fire caught again in there, I think last night as they're trying to clear the rubble. Now, it's just absolutely terrible. It's like that's not acceptable. 23 people have now, at least 23 people are thought to have died in that one missile hit on that building. Just an absolute human travesty, that. And then the Russian MOD, it appears, produced a meme about that said "right on target." Said the Ministry of Defense of Russia after the horrible attack on the civilian building in Uman. War criminals. Just again, pro-Russian voices in the thread that are paid by the Kremlin to come on my thread and go, "Oh, lol, all this kind of stuff," and support all your Russian approaches and say, and all your whataboutery. Yeah, but what about the Ukrainians doing this? No, don't deflect. What about the Russian MOD, their activities, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, the killing of civilians, and then saying, yeah, we're right on target? Explain that. And the idea that, and I keep getting this pushback from pro-Russians, they're not running out of missiles. They are running out of missiles. There's huge, it depends how you define running out of missiles. They are, at the moment, sending missiles at the rate they're making them, which indicates that they don't have the stockpiles. So Smart Ukrainian Cat here says it's already obvious how precise Ukrainian intel on Russian missiles is, and not only missiles, not only Russian, we know everything ones can easily give us, but don't. Not quite sure I understand that. But back to the stats, 23 missiles launched today. That is the production tempo. Stocks are empty, and then comes up with some Excel spreadsheets. The amount of time between strikes, the number of missiles used, it looks like they are using them at the rate they can make them. So there is that. Right, capture Russian ammunition. I haven't seen this for a long time, actually. But what's significant about this is that this is all really new stuff, which suggests that they are, I think this suggests that they are, again, running low on stocks, that they're using much newer, newly created munitions. It's just very rare that you find a whole hall where everything appears to be, shiny and new. But there you go. That's useful for the Ukrainians, obviously, to find that kind of stockpile. And then moving on. So when the Ukrainians are hit, and this is what so Darth Maul here is worth dipping into. The safest thing to be during a Russian missile barrage is a military target. And it's funny, but it's desperately sad that has to be pointed out. And yet the Ukrainians at night in the Kazachia Bay of Sevastopol, Crimea, have hit a Russian depot. This is last night. This was a drone attack. This is significant. Okay, let's try and see if these are pretty significant oil depots that are being hit. There's some big old fires, as you can well imagine, as a result of that oil depot being hit by drones. And there you go. This was a significant hit. A lot of burning. Don't know if that's been extinguished, but yeah. So the Ukrainians appear to be more successful at hitting what they're aiming for. Again, it depends on the footage you get, though, to for sure be able to verify that. The attacked oil storage in Russian-occupied Sevastopol is at the following coordinates. Now, he says that the reds are total losses and the yellows are heavy damage or total loss. So there are a number of oil storage units there that have been basically taken out of use. And you wonder whether that whole facility is inoperable. And that will be a significant hit for the Ukrainians, really significant. Right. They've also had a HIMARS strike on a Russian base. Reportedly, it was an officer post of the 58th Army. It's located 20 kilometers from the front line. It was completely destroyed. I don't know any other details apart from there is a bit of a geolocation for that. That's in the Zaporizhia Oblast. Okay, and then moving on here, Russian Milko GEPhard says Ukraine is using first-person view drones. He uses racing drones that they have had a massive delivery of them. A lot of these, I think, might have come from United 24 drones en masse. Recently, one flew into the window of a Kamaz truck, killing both men inside. He says Ukraine has 3 to 6 month advantage in this new technology, and the worst is yet to come. And indeed, I think the worst probably is yet to come, because we have seen just huge numbers of these filtering their way to the front line. And we know that there are more of these to come. I've seen, when you see them stacked up, these are the drones that they can stack on top of each other. And you see rooms with like literally hundreds of drones. And then you get all these RPG-7 warheads that they're going to attach to them. And I'm seeing so much footage of these drones taking out vehicles and people that there is definitely a massive uptick in the usage of these. And it is a sort of answer to the Lancet loitering munition. And you will see more of it, and there will be more than there are Lancets, but the Lancets seem to be able to hit high-value targets. It's about hitting these. Well, for me at the moment, it's about hitting everything for Ukrainians, but they really need to find a way to get to the air defense systems of the Russians. Right, on to odds and sods. The US is working closely with Ukrainian forces in developing a counteroffensive plan, including developing methods to catch Russian forces by surprise. Commander of the US European General Command, Christopher Cavoli, said. Interesting. We already know that 98% of the stuff has got to where it is intended to get to, or it's got to Ukraine. Sorry. So they're not really waiting for a lot more stuff. There is things like Leopard One Tanks will be dripping through at a later time, and things that they know are going to get there at a later point are obviously not there. But I take it for the counteroffensive, 98% of this the equipment is on the front lines or is in Ukraine. Wagner PMC, like Prigozhin, has admitted that Wagner is going to wind up in the coming future. So he says quite a few things. So what does he say? Wagner PMC will cease to exist in some rather short period of time. We will become history, says Prigozhin. He says, that's how it happens. Every day, Prigozhin comes up with a new mood for himself, anywhere between victorious and defeatist. Today, he's once again hysterical in a 5-minute audio rant, so it's not that one. He declares that the Ukrainian offensive is inevitable, will start after the 2nd of May and when the soil dries up, and Wagner will last 2 to 3 more weeks in the current conditions. He goes on to accuse the military of holding up ammunition again, which results in a 5-time increase in the casualties. We kind of dipped into that earlier. Among the mercenaries, Prigozhin says those responsible will be answering before the family members of Mobiks who will suffer when the Ukrainians start moving. The transcription is below. So he's saying several things, but it is really important that he's saying, the end, that point for Wagner is drawing to a close. That's where we're getting to. Which is interesting. Wagner PMC will cease to exist in some rather short period of time. We will become history. It's all right. That happens. But don't think this loud announcement will now demoralize everyone. And I will make it one more time, if you allow me. First about ammunition, then about Wagner, so on and so forth. So, I think that is an indictment of the military situation for the Russians. And I think, it's interesting that we've seen around Bakhmut Wagner's sphere of influence get smaller and smaller and smaller until they're only operating really in the center of Bakhmut, and the Russian conventional military has taken over. And that is because I think it's the end of days for the Prigozhin's PMC, really. Okay, moving on to military aid and whatnot. According to Ukraine's Defense Minister Reznikov, the first Caesar-propelled howitzer from Denmark have arrived in Ukraine. No, they've all arrived in there, actually, as far as I understand it, and they've given 100% of them as well. So Denmark has been pretty amazing in saying, like, we're going to give all our artillery, self-propelled artillery, to Ukraine. And in fact, they said they were due to have a bunch delivered to them from France, and they said nope, deliver them straight to Ukraine. So well done, the Danish. But they're all in there. CV90s will arrive in Ukraine soon. So these, I think, might be part of the 2% that hasn't got there yet, which are these Swedish infantry fighting vehicles that are very, very good. It's going to be interesting to see them on the battlefield and how they perform. There's the idea that a lot of these bits of kit are really good, but have they been tested as much as other bits of kit? I don't know. Ukrainian tankers that's tank crew, have already started training on Leopard One tanks, and 80 of these will begin to be gradually transferred to Ukraine from the middle of 2023. So that's good stuff there. And the German minister said that over 100 Ukrainian service personnel have started training on the Leopard One battle tanks. And we've had 20 more Italian M109L on the way to being renovated and repaired for delivery to Ukraine. I think they've had 60 of these already delivered. And now 20 more are going off to be done up and made battle ready for the Ukrainians. So they've been spotted on a tank going to Pordenone. This is some footage of a Ukrainian ground-based drone here. What's interesting about this drone is that it's using munitions that already exist. So they're just adapting, like, these are anti-tank mines that they can drive around and explode, and they have significant explosive capability as far as we can work out. A pretty big bang for your buck there. And it explodes off in the distance over there. In a second. Will it? No. Maybe. I don't know. Am I lying to you? No, there it goes. So, if that's under a tank, then possibly the tank might hurt a little bit. So, that is something that may be brought onto the battlefield at some point in the near future. We've seen a lot of innovation for aerial drones now, and also for marine drones, naval drones and whatnot. Now we are seeing ground-based drones being tinkered with. Right, Germany has offered to produce 250,000 artillery shells, which is quarter of the 1 million shells, 155mm shells that the EU plans to produce for Ukraine. So Germany stepping up their industrial military complex will be saying thank you very much. Democrats demand that Biden hand over F-16 and long-range missiles, according to The Hill. According to The Hill, the F-16 and long-range missiles can play a key role in the expected counterattack. This is really important. I mean, we heard about a bipartisan resolution that the Congress has seen from April the 25th. Well, now we're seeing, okay, this is Democrats. It'd be great if Republicans could get on board with this. There have been previous sort of bipartisan requests for F-16s before, but this is a renewed one from Democrats. Brilliant. Yeah, give them over. Come on, guys. exactly what's needed. And I had a big old video yesterday on military spending and aid and how you add up that aid. As a really fascinating thread. I wish I'd had this yesterday in advance of that video, because it talks about how the Army's doing quite well out of this. Not so much the Navy and Air Force actually in America, but the US Army is now able to buy things cheaper, is getting more for their money because of the sheer volume of what's being made. The unit price of this stuff is coming down, so they're able to replace their kit with newer and actually cheaper stuff than they were originally planning on replacing it with. So I was talking about how actually there's financial benefit to giving aid to Ukraine in the long run. Conclusion: the army got the majority of the windfall from Ukraine. They are, so to speak, rolling in dough. Meanwhile, the Navy is struggling. The Air Force ditto. So this is why the Air Force might need to convince Biden to start sending F-16s. Then actually it kind of lubricates the kind of whole process for them getting kit and whatnot. Anyway, it's way too much to talk about in the news part, but it would be really interesting to go through that with you. Very good thread there. Okay, now on to geopolitical stuff. Really quickly, I'll keep an eye on France and more Russian spy. I'd keep an eye on France and more Russian spy rings in the coming weeks. So France has chief of counterintelligence has given new details about Russian spy ring broken by the French in the wake of other shenanigans going on. So the French, by the way, if you ever get a chance to watch the Bureau de Legend, one of the best TV series out there, and Engrenage, which is called The Spiral. If you get to see them, the subtitles on, they're both French series. They are phenomenal. Two of my most favorite series of all time. So giving some more props to the French here, nothing to do with this conflict, but this is Sudan. The only people that stood up and said they were going to evacuate other nationalities were the French. 41 nationalities in all. They went and got a load of people out where everyone else is looking after their own. French went and got just people who needed to be evacuated out, 41 different nationalities. So French don't get enough props. They've had a raw deal, I think, from the whole Ukraine thing. Macron may have his own agenda, and that's people take that in different ways. But let's give some props to the French. So, bien fait, les Français. Okay, moving on. So, I talked to you yesterday about the Nord Stream. I'd really be interested to see what Hirsch and Seymour Hirsch says about the new information that's coming out about how there's a Russian boat with a submersible that was in and around the Nord Stream explosions at the time. It was all really interesting. He came out with a freedom of information request to the Danish. The Danish intelligence weren't even going to release this as a freedom of information request. So fascinating details coming out about how, and I've swung much back towards, it looks like the Russians did it because they had a boat with a submersible around the detonation points like 4 days before it happened. It's looking fairly like I'm joining the dots up to them. And then there's an update thread from H.I. Sutton, who's on a new documentary about this that's coming out that he says is going to be a really good documentary. And the submarine rescue ship SS-750 and its deep submergence rescue vessel are ideal for seabed warfare operations. It's basically a crude submersible with manipulator arms. Underwater robots may have also played a role. Yes, it is brightly painted, but it's still ideal for covert missions, as demonstrated by how it's taken over 6 months for this information to get attention. Fortunately, quality journalists and elite open source intelligence people have been on this, and a hat tip to Alexander Oliver, or Oliver Alexander, who I've referred to before, and I'm sure others who independently have been zeroing in on the same information. RE suspicious Russian Navy activity. Hopefully the people who were so willing to believe earlier conspiracy theories will reflect on these revelations. I suspect not. What elaborate excuses will be made to explain the Russian activity? So in short, these latest revelations are important. Arguing that Russia was not directly involved in the Nord Stream attacks will now have to build those doing that will have to build highly silly explanations. Or said another way, it is highly likely, in analyst intelligence speak, highly likely that Russia did it. Damning New York Times story on how Amnesty commissioned an independent review of its deeply flawed Ukraine report. So Amnesty it's such a shame because Amnesty are trying to do the right things for people who need help around the world. Like I'm broadly very supportive of what Amnesty do, and they released this report some months back basically that was very both sidesist. It's like, yeah, Ukrainians have done bad things as well, except the report was highly controversial. A lot of people looked at the methodology and said, no, this ain't right. This is kind of almost whataboutery. I don't know whether they were kind of looking at US imperialism or something like that, and like amnesty being kind of anti that kind of thing. So looking to find fault with the Ukrainians in that way as much as the Russians, or whether they had Russians on their board or whatever. I don't know what the real reasons were, but it seems like the report they brought out wasn't very good. In essence. So then they got such a big backlash that they got an independent review of that report, and that has been leaked in the New York Times, and it doesn't look good for the for Amnesty International. So under international law, it wrote, both sides in any conflict must try to protect civilians regardless of the rightness of their cause. As a result, it is entirely appropriate for rights organizations to criticize violations by the victim of aggression, provided that there is sufficient evidence of such violations. And that's the key, was there sufficient evidence? But the review panel nevertheless unanimously concluded that Amnesty International had botched its statement in several ways, and that its key conclusions that Ukraine violated international law were not sufficiently substantiated by the available evidence. Sorry, my fingers are terrible. Look at that. Oh my goodness. Bear with me a second. It's what happens when you have a mouse that goes nuts and you can't feel the end of your fingers. Right. But the review panel nevertheless unanimously concluded that Amnesty International had botched its statement in several ways, and that its key conclusions that Ukraine violated international law were not sufficiently substantiated by the available evidence. The overall narrative of August the 4th release was written in language that was ambiguous, imprecise, in some respects legally questionable, the report found. This is particularly the case with the opening paragraphs, which could read as implying, even though this was not Amnesty International's intention, that on a systemic or general level, Ukrainian forces were primarily or equally to blame for the death of civilians resulting from attacks by Russia. So when Russia attacked the idea was that the Ukrainians were hiding near civilians, as far as I remember, and that therefore, when loads of civilians were killed by Russian attacks, that was the Ukrainians' fault and not the Russians' fault, and actually that the Ukrainians were more to blame. But of course, like, the evidence for that wasn't as robust as Amnesty were actually claiming. An earlier version of the report was harsher, according to the person briefed on the matter, but Amnesty International lobbied the panel to soften its tone, and it did so in some respects, like revising its sorry, actually it might be my mouse that's going nuts, by revising its characterization of Amnesty's conclusion that Ukrainian forces violated international law from not substantiated to not sufficiently substantiated. So originally it said it wasn't substantiated at all. The news release accused Ukraine of a pattern of failing to take either step, while also saying it should have warned civilians. But the report said Amnesty International failed to meaningfully engage with the Ukrainian authorities about whether equally good alternative locations, evacuations, or warnings were feasible. The report also said the descriptor pattern was imprudent because it implied that generally many or most of the civilian victims of the war died as a result of Ukraine's decision to locate its forces in the vicinity of civilians, as opposed to Russia's willingness to target civilians or civilian objects deliberately or indiscriminately, basically victim blaming. Lacking sufficient information, it said the group should have used more cautious language. And finally, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will begin a week-long tour of Africa this weekend, during which, and among other things, he will try to convince the countries of the global south to move away from the neutrality regarding the Russian war against Ukraine. So really important that that's happening too. Okay, Tool Pips, thank you so much. I've got to go. As you can see, I've been pulled away to a football match. Take care, and I'll speak to you a little bit later.